Getting a phone call with Insomniac's first official employee, Craig Stitt, was a goal we certainly had and accomplished. He was not only an artist on the entire Spyro trilogy, but he was the sole reason Spyro the Dragon even exists in the first place.
Of all the games I've worked on, Spyro is the one that's near and dear to my heart. Ted Price, the president, CEO, owner, whatever you want to call him, he goes, everyone just go off into your corners for, I can't remember how long it was, 2 or 3 weeks, just brainstorm, and come back and we'll all pitch an idea, and then we'll pick, and then that's the next game Insomniac would do. So I think Ted came back with the Alien Invasion game. Alex Hastings, the lead programmer, came back with an off-road racing game. I can't remember what Brian came back with. And I came back with the idea of doing a game where you get to play the dragon. Most games where you were fighting the dragon, or maybe you were riding a dragon, but you never got to be the dragon. The original game I pitched, it targeted a little bit older audience. It's going to be a little more realistic game or look. And you would start out as a hatchling, as a baby dragon. But each level you would be an older, larger dragon, more powerful dragon. But each level you would become a bigger, more powerful dragon. So by the end, you'd be this huge, gargantuan dragon, magic-using, uber powerful dragon. And Mark Cerny, who was our producer, made 2 suggestions. One, if you keep the dragon the same age, sequels would be easier, and which was a good point. And he pointed out also that by the time we had this game done and on the shelves, the average age of the PlayStation user would be a couple years younger. So instead of targeting the 17 to 20 years old, if we targeted like 12 to 15 year olds. Nobody liked My Little Dragon I designed, which is just as well because we brought in another guy, Charles Zimbalist, who actually did the actual character design for Spyro. On Disruptor, Insomniac's first game, they spent $10,000 or something like that for the entire ad campaign, which is basically a couple of print ads for a month or 2. Sony picked up Spyro, and they spent, I think, $10 million on advertising or something ridiculous like that. My primary job was physically building and texturing the worlds you ran around in. Although I didn't design Spyro or build the model for him, I actually did do the textures for Spyro. It's just a little rounder. Zimbalist is leaner and sleeker looking. And I agree his design is better than mine. I'm glad we went with his. It just would have been nice to have had it been mine. All the other games I worked on, had I not been there would have been another artist who had done the artwork. In the case of Spyro, if I hadn't been there, there would be no Spyro the Dragon.
I've always loved dragons. To me, they are just the greatest creature. I mean, it's the combination of a Tyrannosaurus Rex with wings and breathes fire. I mean, you've got the best of everything in a dragon.
And immediately everybody said, yeah, that's it. Because dragons can fly, they can run, they can flame, they can jump, they can do anything, and they're cool.
Spyro, from the initial design, was supposed to be able to swim. Now, we didn't have any big swimming challenges in Spyro 1, but we did have some water obstacles and some hidden rooms that you were supposed to swim out to and get to. And then as we got towards the end, we realized that Alex, the programmer, he wasn't going to have time to program swimming. And so we all of a sudden had to come up with, but we already had most of the world built with water that, Spyro was supposed to be able to swim in. So all of a sudden we had to come up with a way to make water dangerous, but not dangerous. So it was this kind of kludgy thing where you could swim for a little while and then make a shark eat you or something like that. The skies in Spyro were a new technique that Peter Hastings came up with to try and save memory. We actually built the skies out of polygons. Each vertex, each point had a color value. And so I remember Ted Price did the first one, and then he asked me if I could try one, and then everyone really liked mine. So at first I thought I got stuck doing the skies because they were a pain in the butt to do. At the Eventually, the tools got a little better to build them, and then it got to be really fun. So then I really enjoyed doing the Sky. So I ended up doing all the Skies for all 3 Spyros. But the worlds, I typically did about a third of the worlds for each of the 3 games. In 2, I think almost all the home worlds were mine. I know I did Buzz's Dungeon. I guess that's the boss round. And I may have done some of the Sparks mini rounds. I think I did Icy Peak. China Tower, I definitely know that one. Maybe Sergeant Bird's Base. Well, Lost Fleet, I definitely remember doing Lost Fleet. Midnight Mountain's mine. I went on vacation before we actually shipped the game. Because at that point we were like in a lockdown where you didn't make changes unless you really had to. And so it was no big deal for me to leave. And I've taken vacation a little earlier than usual. Yeah, so I came back and went to play it, and I was pissed. The worst part is they took the whirlwind out, they didn't take the island out. We were in the final version of the game. I'm not sure, Brian Hastings, one of the lead programmers, is the one that pulled that. And I'm not sure why, because it was working. Because when I left, the game was all but finished with some final polish and debugging. Viscerally remembered which areas I had worked on, because you'd run into a room or climb up on something or go past something, and I can remember having a certain set of textures that were just really problematic, or a certain build or a certain geometry that just didn't want to work originally. No, this was sort of in Spyro 1. It was one of the Magic Crafter rooms. There was a cave. And I remember just trying to get a texture in there for the rock pattern that didn't look like wallpaper. So you couldn't see the repetitiveness stamp in the textures. So he's running through this room, and I just remember it's like, oh yeah, this texture took forever to get right. In Spyro 2, Summer Forest, there was this very complicated spiral staircase that went up to somewhere. And I worked and just could not, finally got the staircase to work. The geometry on spiral staircases is very tricky. And even in the real world, it's tricky. And then it was doubly so given that the program, Spyro had to be able to run up it kind of automatically, And then finally had it work, and then it got cut. Then the designers decided to not have that and tore it out. Visually, it made that little part of the garden very cluttered, so I was glad to see it go. It just kind of sucked that, I spent all that time to get it to work. I think it was just a little spiral staircase that went up to something. I think it was kind of back behind where you start. There's a couple spots where you can see my son's name, which is Brian, spelled with a Y, carved in this curly letters. And then the funny thing there was, Oliver came up to me and he goes, hey, my son's name is Brian, and it's spelled with a Y, but I also have a daughter named Brenda. I don't want to tell my son that his name's carved in there if my daughter's name, so could you put Brenda someplace? And so that was towards the end. So it says Brenda Winter Tundra. I think in the top of the door it says Brenda. That one's not so elaborate. I literally just kind of wrote Brenda at the top. This is a pretty well-known little Easter egg. There was a guy named Dan, was one of our animators, and somehow he kind of ended up as the mascot for Insomniac. And somewhere way back when somebody stole his driver's license, scanned in the photograph, and so there's Dan's face is hidden all over in the Spyro games. It really was kind of the mascot for the company. That was a nightmare level to build, because it had to be very precise, because everything had to be lined up just right, the ramps, and then the sky. That was a fun sky to do. I think that was one of the first times I really tried to do more than just clouds in the sky, because that one actually has like trees in the distance. And once again, it's not painted, it's not a texture, it's this strange little system of building stuff out of polygons. Skelos Badlands. That's one of my favorite levels. I've also got a thing for bones and skeletons, and so that was just so I love dragons and I love bones, and so that one is skeletons and dragons. So it was like the perfect level. The level designers, it was literally just curves and blocky shapes on a map. and dimensions. The first ones the maps were originally just drawn on graph paper by hand. They really were just blocky shapes, and sometimes the dimensions of the room were very critical, and widths of paths and hallways. The big one was elevation of different floors and platforms was all very critical. But what those platforms were and what the world looked like was completely left to the artists. Spyro was originally green. I got the videotape and we realized two things. One, most of the time he's going to be running around on grass, so it's going to be a little hard to see. And two is there was 2 or 3 other platforming games with green characters. There was Gex, the gecko. There was Croc, the crocodile. I sat down and did 8 or 10 different colors of Spyro, and just did these short little bursts of video and recorded. And we just sat down. And we just all watched it and picked the one we liked. Yet it hasn't aged well, but it's really cool to watch it because he looked really good black, but you lost all the details. He looked really good this dark kind of brick red. Just visually, just sat there and just tweaked the colors until I got them to where I liked them. At the time, we were working with Universal Studios, and they were our publisher. Universal was very difficult to work with, and so we wanted to get away from Universal. But if we left Universal, Universal owned the property rights to Spyro. So if we left Universal, we had to leave Spyro with Universal. It'd been up to me because I really didn't want to leave Spyro. Probably would have stayed, but it's definitely a good thing we left. So we had no intention to have his name be Pete, but by the time we got to where we needed a real name, we'd been calling him Pete for a year and a half. One of the early ideas that we liked, or some of us liked, was Spyro the Dragon, but we thought that was a little too on the nose and had too much negative pyromaniac connotation. And Brian Hastings pitched Spyro, and no one liked it. And a few months later, someone at Sony pitched Spyro, and everyone went, yes! And so whoever is it got Sony got the credit. Brian was like, hey, I've actually got a shirt around here that says Pete. We had our names put on the pockets, and I had Pete put on mine just because. As of yet, I've never seen anybody comment on. It's something that drove me nuts, and I'm angry at myself for having screwed up on it. If you go back to the original textures for Spyro himself, his wings. If you picture a bat wing or a dragon wing, it's kind of this, peak, inverted V shape, and then there's the little spine, the little bony structure that comes down. That's literally on a bat's wing. It's the wings on a bat are literally its fingers. They're just really long, skinny fingers with tissue strung between them. But the way I drew it is basically those little struts I have in the wrong places. It's hard to explain visually, but it drove me nuts because it wasn't until after I'm playing the game I'm like, oh crap, those wings. It's literally the same exact texture. It's just applied slightly different to the polygon. It's just where those little struts come out of the main arm of the wing were wrong.